okay, Brianna, like you've lived in these countries, you've worked for these brands, you've had these experiences, like how are you going to connect these dots into something that gives back? And I
Mm.
think that was my growth, was actually taking a time out and really processing every experience to figure out my next move.
Hey, everybody. My name's Ryan Atkinson, and you are on the Biz Cloud. Today, we are welcoming Brianna Killculen, the founder of Anact, to the podcast. I'm super excited to have her on today, talk about entrepreneurship and sustainability. So, Brianna, thank you so much for coming on. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Like I said before, we hopped on and started recording. You have an awesome, impressive background. And I was reading one article that you actually have spent time living in Uganda and South Africa. So I want to start there. Can you give us like context about your experiences there and like what you were doing over there? Because I think that is so cool. I always admire people that live overseas.
Yeah, it's funny. I was actually talking to one of my colleagues today about my background, and she was like, "How did you get to this place? Like, you're such this is." Well, she's like a humanitarian space and world. Like, what is this? What is this? I don't even understand it. Yeah. So I actually, even before I went there, I always wanted to work for the UN or State Department. Like, that's always been my North Star in life. I think I'm just a globalist by nature. So anywhere where there's an organization that's like working together on global issues, I'm just like, yes, that's for me. I actually started working for the Secret Service prior to going to Uganda.
Wow.
Yeah, so I worked for the Secret Service when I was in university in DC, and then after I graduated, and so that was the way that I wanted to be able to get into like State Department and foreign
Mhm.
affairs and work my way to the UN. And then this opportunity came up for Uganda, and I had some advisors say, if you want to work in the humanitarian space, you really want to get field experience
Yeah.
and be on the ground in the trenches, understanding what, and not talking about these issues, but experiencing them. And
Yeah.
so that was really what pushed me to live in South and East Africa and have those experiences for myself and understand the humanitarian nonprofit space.
That's
So
interesting. And so when you have these experiences, I mean, coming back and like reflecting on those, I mean, how does that shape you as a person? Because studying abroad or like traveling abroad, you always come back and it's like, oh, wow, like I'm completely different. I understand different perspectives, but I've never done work like that. And I feel like it would be just so transformational. So how does that like really shape you as a person as you reflect back on that?
I think the biggest takeaway is you think when people go, you're gonna impact other people, but the reality is it impacts you.
That's
And
awesome.
you realize, oh, okay, there's just these different ways of living and not like, you know, yes, a civil war, which is what Uganda experienced, like that is
Oh,
not living, but like being able to have a beautiful hut and have access to food and water and be surrounded by family. Like, who am I to say that that's not living?
literally.
So I'm like, and not have, and like, I just had the most peaceful nights where there's like no electricity and you didn't have access to Wi-Fi. And you just finally were like so disconnected and you felt like you could really be there with your thoughts and you could, and just be present in the moment. And I think that's part of the challenge, right? Being in where we're at in the US and having 24/7 access, it is sometimes it's exhausting. We don't ever have like a cave to go back into and to reset unless you go on vacation. And even then, everyone still expects you to be accessible. So I think that was a huge takeaway from me, is just that who are we to say what way of life is better or worse?
Yeah.
Um, and so I just I learned, I feel like, more than I gave. And I just became a firm believer that you need to alchemize like your own story and your own dots and not go into someone else's culture and go into someone else's space and tell them what to do. Unless, of course, it's like a beneficial, like way in which you're going to ingrain yourself in that culture and carry and give back. But if it's just like, I'm going to come in and everyone needs to wear, like, for example, Tom's shoes, they dropped off all their shoes. They're like,
Mhm.
everyone here needs to wear shoes. But nobody's thinking that, realizing there's parasites in the dust. And so to be in a hot, closed-toed canvas shoe is not a conducive fix. And so what people do is they recycle tires and make flip-flops out of them. So it's like little things like that that made me think like, okay, yeah, people mean well, but like people need to stay in their lane of what actually are problems worth working on.
That's super interesting. So they dropped off a ton of shoes, like closed-toed shoes, but they didn't wear them because like it's hot and it's probably uncomfortable, but they're wearing shoes that are made out of like rubber tires.
Yeah, they're just wearing flip-flops because you want as much like free, breeze on your feet. And so what I did is I was like, all my friends are not going to wear all this Ugandan jewelry as much as I want them to. So I was like, I'll just buy all the shoes and bring them back and regift them, which is what I did.
Oh my God, that is so crazy. That's such an experience. Like I see that's like the benefits for traveling abroad is you get to have like those experiences. I would never even think that that'd be like a thinking process, but now that I know that.
Yeah, but I think the biggest thing too is like I like to connect, I like to understand other people's way of life. I like to be like to have my assumptions, be expanded and broadened and challenged. And so it just keeps you really grateful and present. And that was really my takeaway. And so I really enjoyed it though.
Yeah, I get the sense that you're very mindful of yourself and when you're around others. Is there some sort of like, I don't want to say like technique, but like, is there some sort of like technique you use like to like really exert this like mindfulness?
I think after traveling to all the countries I've been to, that you realize there is a universal language, which is just
Mm,
understanding human body language and
mm.
people's eyes and feeling energy. So I think as a little girl, I was just always like very empathetic and could always I was very aware of like what everyone's emotional state, like in my family
That's
and my extended family. I was like, oh, something's off. Okay, nothing. And people are like, no, there's nothing wrong. I'm like, no, there's something off here. But I think it comes with time. And like, even I get up leveled. Like when I moved to the West Coast and from Baltimore to San Diego, all of a sudden, like mindful eating had never really registered. Like I kind of had been on that kick. And then when I was exposed to, why eating organic made sense and all of these different things, I was like, oh, okay, like that upped my level of consciousness. But I think I'm like a nuts and bolts girl. It was like
yeah.
boots and nuts. No, that doesn't make sense. But I a soup, wait, is it soup to nuts? Soup.
I don't know it, but I get
Okay.
I kind of get the thought. I know what you're saying.
Like I like to know the mechanics of everything.
Mm,
Like your t-shirt, like
yeah.
where that fan comes from. Like I just love manufacturing and supply chain and really just understanding the process of like a physical good process.
That is really interesting. And I do want to talk about that. Your experience, like with these supply chains and some of these factories that you visited, like worldwide. Can you tell us about when you were first like exposed and how you're exposed to traveling and checking out like supply chains and factories? And you can kind of just give us an insight into like what those factories are like inside. I've never been in one, but so I would love to hear it.
Yeah. So for me, after I did humanitarian work, I ended up in the for-profit space because I did not like to ask for money
Yep, fair.
for nonprofits. And so, but now I ask for money all the time for fundraising.
Yeah.
But I think at the time, what I found frustrating was like people only wanted to give money in nonprofits for like pineapple seeds, but they didn't want to pay for the gas to get to the villages. So it was very limiting. And I think I just genuinely do believe in capitalism, except with
Yep.
like a conscious capitalism is what I believe in.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, there should be an exchange of energy for goods and services, and then you just tack on like your expectations socially and environmentally around that.
Yeah.
So for me, after left East Africa, I had a pretty traumatic experience where I was actually kidnapped, and so that's why I moved home.
What?
So yeah, which is like so that in the humanitarian space is like very common. I know like in the non-humanitarian space, people are like, that's like the worst thing. But
Yeah.
like in that field, you're like, yeah, like at least once or twice, like each person's like had that experience. And
Wow.
so yeah, so having going through that, I decided to take a break and move back to the US. And then Under Armour was recruiting for supply chain manufacturing. So I ended up moving to Baltimore and saying, I'm just going to take a break and be with like a larger corporation that just has more benefits and a little more stability. Ironically, I felt like it was more dangerous in Baltimore than it was actually like in
Fair.
the village I lived in Uganda. But because there was like no guns where I was, but there's like a lot of guns in Baltimore.
Yep.
And I love, love, love Baltimore. But it was definitely just funny to have my family be so concerned for me
Yeah.
when I lived in Uganda. And I was like, you should be more concerned now. But yeah, so I started in supply chain sourcing, and they had a trip coming up to Central America for their apparel factories. And I just put my name in the ring, and I was like, hey, I would like to see this. I
Yeah.
want to know what's up. And so we did like a 1 week tour from Honduras to El Salvador to Nicaragua. And I just got to go in the belly of the beast and see how our clothes were made. And I got to, in El Salvador, I actually got to sew. The one of the factory owners put me on the factory floor, and he was like, "You're going to learn how to sew a machine, which is really, really hard,
Oh,
and then actually sew a garment." And so it took me like 2 hours to thread the machine, and everyone's like yelling in Spanish, and it's like, there's no AC and it's like hot. And I was like, whoa, this is a lot. And then we did compression fabric. So at the time we were doing like alter ego shirts, like
yeah.
Batman and like Superman. And so I had to like figure out how to like not sew my fingers and do this. And so this whole process, like my garment looked insane at the end. But I remember coming home that day and being like, wow, nobody knows this is how our clothes are made. And that's just one part, right? That's not even including the farm. That's not including the textile manufacturing plant. It's just that's one piece of the pie. So that was my takeaway. This whole system, this infrastructure is like very hidden, but
Mm.
we're all complicit because we're all wearing clothes. So why is there such a disconnect in this understanding of global manufacturing for clothes? And so that was really my big move and transition. And then from there, I became the first one to volunteer. So I was like always going to factories, always willing. I just wanted to see the whole process.
That's super interesting. Yeah. So, like, how are these buildings like built out? Like, when we say factory, like, how big are these things? I know you just said there's like no AC, everyone's yelling in Spanish, but like, what's it like inside? Like, I'm just curious, like, what are the people like inside these factories? Like, what's kind of their mindset? I'm assuming very, very blue collar. But yeah, what's their mindset? What are these factories like from the outside and like really on the inside workings?
Yeah, so most factory owners are like incredibly wealthy. They own multiple
Mm.
plants. They have other businesses. They're usually very tied in with the local or the country's government. So they like love to take you out to like all the places. So I got to go to like really nice places in each
Mm.
country I was in. But then the factories themselves are usually they're based off of low cost labor.
Okay.
So they're usually like 45 minutes outside of the city center. They're usually in rough neighborhoods. There's full security over everything.
Wow.
And they usually are very large, depending on like what their capabilities are and who their customers are. So a typical factory is probably gonna have 30 to 40 customers. So you'll see Adidas next to Nike, next to Under Armour. So everyone's
Oh my
next
God.
to each other because they all have the same capabilities that each brand needs. Sometimes like a Nike will like do a joint venture and own a factories because they don't want anyone to copy new designs that they have coming out.
Yep.
So yeah, they're usually very hot. If you go to a textile plant, oh, it's like or fabric mill, it's like the smell is horrible.
Oh no.
Um, because it's just chemicals. It's like just it's disgusting. Um, it's so, and like you have to wear like an eye mask because it will sting your eyes, like all the
Wow.
dyes that are dyeing the fabrics. They're usually always outdoors. Need like air coming in and
Mm.
out. And then of course farms, cotton farms, going to visit and like getting to meet all the farmers and see they usually have obviously land that they're
Yeah.
growing, and they usually have food crops next to the cotton. And then I've actually never been to like a synthetic fiber fabric process. So like polyester, right, comes from oil. I've never traced that far back to say like, where is the oil being extracted from and how's it being converted into yarn? Like I've never seen that part personally.
That's interesting. I think you made a really good point a little previously about like we're wearing our clothes right now and like no one really thinks like, oh, like where did these clothes really come from? But it comes from a lot of these factories where it's low cost, it's like disgustingly bad conditions, people aren't treated well. And I think that's a really interesting point. So like is that something we should be uncovering as like Americans? And if so, I mean, like how do you uncover that?
So there'll be like different PR crises that will happen, and that will be what like pushes the industry forward. So we had the collapse of
Mm,
Rana Plaza in 2013 in Bangladesh. And so like that thousands of people were killed. And so that wakes people up. I think Gap was in there, a couple big brands. And so it really feels like it's a PR crisis, it's legislation, and it's customer driven. Like those are the three drivers to like to escalate, you know, or not to escalate, but to improve to escalate or I can't think of the word to, but to get the standard higher.
mhm.
Or like for me with Anact, I'm like, let's just be transparent out of the gate to the customer about the experience and what everything is in our process. And like we can educate and drive change and bring manufacturing back to the markets. And then that people then can see firsthand, okay, this is a process. Why is no one else explaining this or doing this
Interesting.
for disruption? But it is like, I think it's also another big thing is China produces over 40% of global textiles. So I think our trade relations are so bad with
Mhm.
China that Joe Biden just asked all US engineers to leave Chinese manufacturing plants like
Oh,
last
wow.
month. So I think that like that is another big driver is like American policy towards countries, and that will, you know, if we stop doing business with China, then the entire apparel industry is going to have to
Oh God.
figure its stuff out.
Is that kind of like scary though? Cause like so many people do business in China. And like if all of a sudden we pull them out, I mean, I mean, like what are some of like the repercussions? Is that the right word for it? But like it'd be just nuts, wouldn't it be?
Yeah, I mean, I think people who work in apparel industry, like that's their greatest fear
Yeah.
is that right there, right? Because then like the way that they produce their clothing goes away, the cost that they baked
Mhm.
in, and they have to think of a new country, a new system, a new process in order to do what they've already been doing for years and years.
Yeah.
Personally, I'm excited for it because I'm just like, you know, I don't know if you've spent time in China, but it's smog is horrible, like so bad. Like this is gross, but like I sneezed and it was like black. Like that's how bad it gets
No.
there. Yeah. I was like, whoa, like what have I been like inhaling? So I think that I want that to happen because I think that this linear economy and this way we've grown accustomed, especially in the US, of designing for linear use and not thinking circularly
Mhm.
is wreaking havoc everywhere, you know, that we're not like, hey, we're going to make a product, but we're going to think about all the parts in that. And then we're going to think about what to do with it afterwards. So I'm like, we got to get there because like driving from Jacksonville to Miami, where I'm from, like you just see these hills and you're like, wow, like, guess we have hills in Florida all of a sudden. And they're like, no, it's landfill and they put grass over it. So
Oh my.
I think that people the closer people's trash gets to them, the faster they're going to be incentivized to innovate. That's
Yes.
my theory too. That's my fourth theory. It's like, you know, Gen Z, legislation, PR crisis, and then the fourth is like the minute that like trash gets to people who pay to be away from it is going to be the minute that it pushes things forward.
That's interesting. Is there any way that we can avoid that situation to get, keep trash away, but like that's going to take, in my mind, like people are going to have mindful thought on, ways so they can reduce like their own trash. Could you give us like 3 ways people could do that? I would love to be educated in the space. I know a lot of other people would be as well.
Of course. So there's actually Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but for fashion, it's called the biarchy. And
Oh,
so, yeah, so it's cool. So it's like when you need something new, you like follow this triangle to say, like,
mm,
hey, like, can I borrow it? Can I swap? Can I thrift? Like, can I make it on my own? Like, before, and the last one is, can I buy new? And so I think that that inspires you to think about all these other options, like for Halloween, right? Instead
Yeah.
of being like, I'm going to go buy something new, it's like, what do I need? And then how can I piece this together without spending
That's really
money?
cool.
Like, I think that way. And then, of course, like I apply that methodology to everything. Like, I compost, I recycle soft plastic at the grocery store. So it's just like anything that comes into my possession, input
Mhm.
wise, I then try to make sure can be, um, it can break down in a place where it doesn't go into the trash. So that's kind of how I think of it.
That's interesting. How do you think, like, how has sustainability changed since like you first entered the industry with Under Armour? I think it was in like 2014, 2015 with sustainability. So like 7-ish years or whatnot. How has sustainability changed in their perspective of like Americans, but also worldwide?
Yeah, so sustainability has so much like of a stigma, in my opinion, attached
Yeah.
to it. And so I've been like very careful with it because sometimes people feel very caught like it's an accusatory thing when you're like,
Mhm.
this is sustainable or this isn't, because it's like they're doing something bad. So I think it holds a lot of different weight. And like a lot of people in my time working on the brand side, I would find some people would equate it with energy savings. They would equate it with water savings,
Mm.
electricity. But then, like, other people would see it as just purely social. It's human rights. It's making sure there's no child labor. So it's
Yeah.
like what I realize is there's so many different definitions of sustainability based off of what each person's experience is. And then you have all these brands that are greenwashing and just choose
Mhm.
and like taking off what they think, that it will resonate with customers. So I think for me, like where I finally landed was the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals,
Mm.
because they're quantitatively driven. There's 17 goals. They're ratified globally by almost every country, I think, except Russia. And they're like these 17 goals that say like these are different issues we have to address as a planet in order to meet the needs of the present and create needs for and provide for the needs of the future. And that's what I think sustainability is, right? Is like being able to have everything you need and then making sure whoever is coming before or after you is going to have access to the same resources and tools that you have. That's how
Mm.
I look at sustainability, whether it's social or environmental. Um, if that does that make sense?
Yes, that absolutely makes sense. And I want to talk about like the 17 United Nations Sustainability Development Goals, because that's actually I saw on your guys' website like what you consider your North Star. It says that's our North Star, and we partner with change makers in their respective fields that take action. So I kind of want to shift the conversation to you and like Enact. Can you tell us a little bit more about like Enact? You're obviously very passionate about sustainability. You're probably one of the most mindful people I've ever met. So can you tell us a little bit more about how like Enact started with these sustainability goals in mind? I'd love to leave the floor to you on this, 'cause I think it's a really interesting company.
Thank you so much for that feedback. I appreciate it. And it is, I think for me, it's like, I don't do anything unless think it provides real value. If it
Mhm.
doesn't provide value, I'm not going to get behind it.
Yeah.
And I think that really Enact was born out of frustration in my industry, in my space of talking to the people who were the thought leaders and not seeing them do and the things I felt like needed to be done. And they knew what was missing.
Mhm.
And I felt like everyone just looks to Patagonia and says, we're going to do equal to Patagonia. We're
Yep.
not going to go above, we're going to go equal. And I'm like, Patagonia should be the norm, not the exception. Like that's how horrible the situation is in that the
Mhm.
infrastructure. Like one shirt at Forever 21 has traveled more than the average American and is
Wow.
sold at $4. It makes no sense. This makes no sense. The math does not make sense.
Yeah.
So I think for me, I was like, all right, an act, I want to be inspired by a movement bigger than a
Mhm.
product and a brand. So like, I think when you start off as an entrepreneur, there's a million things you need to do. And it's coming left, right, center, like, whoa, here we go. Yeah, like how do I like decipher? And so I feel like for me, and I was like, I can take one act every day towards the vision. I can
Ah,
move closer to this. As long as I take one act, it's okay. Like I'm not, I have a vision in my head. It's not here in front of me, but I'm taking a movement and act towards it every day. And this
Mm,
is what I'm passionate about. So I'm going to make it ambiguous enough that whatever people's other passions are, like your, vision for your podcast, that when you feel frustrated when something's not working or something doesn't go your way, that you're like, okay, there's a larger community of people who are taking one act a day
yeah.
towards what they believe in. And so I wanted it to feel this community around activism, whatever that looks like for you. Um, and the Tao's like our Trojan horse. It's walking the walk, talking the talk in the space that we know how to do. But we know that there's a lot of other industries and spaces that need change, and other people, that's their role to play in it. So we just wanted to say, we see you, we hear you, let's go. Um, so that was an act. And then our first act has been the bath towel.
Uh,
And yeah, just hate the smell of mildewy towels, have naturally resist the growth of bacteria. Looked at the market, didn't see anyone doing anything. Um, it was like a $25 billion TAM. I was like,
wow.
okay, this is a large market. There's a lot of gaps in it. We can be
Yeah.
a product category leader in this space by providing a unisex brand that brings men into the conversation.
Mhm.
We, don't use any chemicals or dyes, so we have a limited color palette, which is
Mhm.
become an amazing talking point as opposed to a limitation, which is
Yep.
what people thought. If you don't do what everyone else is doing, then like you're not going to make it. Right.
Yep.
And my thought process is, if you logically don't do certain things and back it up, that's more relatable than doing like we're not providing value if we do what everyone else is doing. So it's really what Anact has been born from.
I love that. So it sounds like it's been like a little bit of a movement that you're starting to take it like an act each day, which I love. And then it's also, you saw an opportunity here. Did you say like 25, $28 billion
Mhm.
TAM, total addressable
Yeah.
market? And I think that is really cool. You saw that there was a gap in there and then you shot it with the movement and with a product that both genders can love. That is unisex.
I think, yeah. And coming from the apparel industry, I hated feeling like this only fits for this body type. This only fits,
Yeah.
for like, this group. And so for a towel, it just is like, I love being able to say, we can talk to anyone.
Hmm.
Anyone can be a part of this movement and consume or like have this product. And so that was like another big thing for me is one size fits all.
Yeah. I'm I want to ask, like, how do I ask this? How do you, because I think people get behind movements, they get behind a brand's reasoning for to be alive, to what do they say? How do you market that? An act is more than just a towel. This is a real movement and we want you to be a part of it.
So I think at the end of the day, we want people to be a part of the movement, but people have to love your product. It has to
Mhm.
be a better performing product
It's
for
true.
them to trust you and get behind it. So for us, we're really seeing product market fit, and that people are loving our product and giving us reviews. And so through that, then I think that once that layer of trust is created, that bond, then people are like, oh, okay, I'm really proud to talk about this. And
Yeah.
like, what are they doing? Oh, okay, these are the things they're doing. Okay, now I'm gonna like be doing these things too. And so I think that that's what I've learned. And then I think sometimes too, like not leading with the brand, but like so many people, I think, like always want their name, right? Like whatever first and last name as a brand. And it's like people, to me, like for this example, there's a coffee shop near me. It's called Palomino. And so they do amazing coffee. But if you're driving by and you see Palomino, you're not going to connect they do coffee. But what they've done is they do a marketing sign that just says coffee. And then people come in and want coffee, and then they find out it's Palomino. That's like what I want for an act. Is people
Mm,
want a great towel, they want a sustainable towel. They come to us and then they find out it's an act who's doing that. That's the logic I like.
that's really interesting. And like when you're with Under Armour and like now an act, I mean, how does sustainability from an internal perspective, how is it different from when you're in corporate, Under Armour, 1,000 employees to Anact? What's different internally when you're in corporate compared to a startup?
Great question. A lot of times, or most times, everything is run through legal. for larger corporations.
Yep.
So it's all about compliance, all about brand risk, all about ensuring there's no potential lawsuit claims. So I think and you have also so many people who have to have the buy-in. You have,
Mhm.
if you're going to do something, yes, you need legal, then you need to have the head of marketing. So I will go market this on our website or on our social media campaign. With Anact, we just get to go for gold. We get to set this bar. Yeah, like I don't have to like be like, hey, we should like do the UN's like sustainable development goals. Like I just get to do them.
Yeah.
I don't, like I don't need anyone's approval except like this is their approval of like what's working and what's not.
Mhm.
So I think the nimbleness, the ability to jump ahead and say this is where I think is where we're going, excuse me, is like very freeing as opposed to being like, it's going to take years. We're going to have to get so many people on board. And then guess what? They're going to go to another brand and they're going to start all over again.
Yep.
I hate that. Hate that.
That's really interesting. I think you've had a really interesting life. Being in Africa and then like working for corporate and then doing your own startup gig. I mean, those are the three pieces we like covered about you. And I think it's super fascinating. Is there a time in your life that you think like you grew the most? Like you look back and you're like, wow, like from 20 to 25, I grew so much. Is there a specific time frame that comes in mind with all of your experiences that you've had?
It's such a, I've never been asked this question. So I'm like, wow, good one. Good one, Ryan.
I
Um,
appreciate
I
it.
do. No, but I do believe in living life. Like my dad's like, this life is not a dress rehearsal. You've got
Mm,
to go. And so
seriously.
I, like you don't want to look back and be like, man, that would have been cool. But
Mm,
like, I wanted safety. I wanted security. I wanted this like stability for myself.
mm,
I think that for me, I was in your 20s, you have a different energy. Like
mm.
I was just a pistol. Like I had unlimited energy to do, like to
Yeah.
be in sleep in airports for 30 hours, to like go to new countries. Like now I don't have that same energy. I mean, I could tap into it if I need to, but I prefer not to. Like
Yeah.
now I'm like, I'll just like take like my time and
Yeah.
like I'll, like I could just fly somewhere and be like flying to Asia and just go like right into
Yeah.
the factory and work for the day. Like now that sounds like torture. Like I would just cry. Like but so I think my 20s was like I was gaining experiences and then the growing moment happened when I actually like extracted myself from the environment. And my parents had a house in Florida, in Melbourne, and I just went and lived there for 6 months by myself. And I
Mm,
just really let things marinate. I was like, okay, Brianna, like you've lived in these countries, you've worked for these brands, you've had these experiences. Like, how are you going to connect these dots into something that gives back? And I
mm.
think that was my growth, was actually taking a time out and really processing every experience to figure out my next move.
It's interesting. So how did you do that? You're alone for 6 months, but was it like writing through, or is it just like sitting there and basically going back to the village of like no Wi-Fi and like no connection with people? How did that happen? Because I think that's actually a really fascinating topic.
I went into it was incognito mode, and that's when I started designing Anact. And I was like, I'm
Wow.
going to take all of these experiences and all of these moments and all of these learnings and takeaways, and I'm going to infuse them into something that
Mm,
I believe is beneficial for the industry, for the planet, for myself moving
mm,
forward. And so that was just a lot of journaling, a lot of recounting experiences. And then like as you're doing blogs and you're pitching, you start to understand your story more
mm.
of like how you got there. But I think that was the growth move, was taking a leap of faith, leaving my job without knowing where my next paycheck was going to come, and taking time to understand my journey that so far.
Interesting. How important is it? I think you just kind of hinted at it, but like how important is it to like know your story? Because like being 23 years old, like I know my story. Like I grew up in Iowa, moved to Boston, moved to Austin. I have my own
Mm.
personal experiences, but if I had to give a concise story of myself, I don't think I could. I could try, but I mean, how important is it? I mean, how important is it to like know your story for that growth period?
I think your story is everything, right? That's what you're a product of experiences that you've had. That's what shapes your reality.
Mm,
So a lot of times I think the scariest part for founders is like we're all like a little crazy, right? Like to do what we do. So
Yep.
it's like, okay, like something must have happened to us earlier on that like made us fearless. And so I think that that's like something people don't talk about is I think there's like a lot of childhood trauma and the
Mm,
storyline of founders. And because there's like the thought that like I can jump in here and I got this and I'll figure it out is like not in everyone. And I
yeah,
think it comes from you have earlier experiences in your life that you have to do that. And then when you do that, it's not as scary. Um, so yeah, that's I think it's so I think with most founders, they say your ability to your business not to get to where you wanted to get comes from when you can no longer solve problems.
mm,
And the scariest problems are not sales, they're not your product, it's your emotional development as a being, as a human being. That's the scariest part is, and for example, like for me, I had a huge issue asking for help. I have a huge issue being vulnerable. So that's like part of my earlier like experiences as a kid. So then now, like when you're a founder, if you don't ask for help, like that's bad, that's really bad. But like that's what was happening to me early on. And so
mm.
then I was stunting the growth of where we were going. So I think that it's just imperative to know yourself, to know the experiences that have sculpted you, because those are going to be the ones that are going to help you. Are they going to either plateau you or they're going to help you get to the next level?
That's awesome. Yeah, I think going back to what you said there of like you kind of have to be a little crazy to start your own company. I was talking with one of my friends down here in Austin about that, and he was like, "Yeah, you have to be like a little crazy to like take that leap of faith. To like you really don't know what you're doing, but yeah, I'll figure it out as I go." And that was right on par with what you said.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. But I think that like you have to have had either had that modeled for you. You have to have somewhere where you've felt that feeling before and you're like, I'm gonna figure that I got this.
Yeah, I want to ask like real quick, like, were your parents like entrepreneurial? Because there was a fascinating study that came out in July that I read. If your parents are entrepreneurs, you're just kind of not bred to be an entrepreneur, but your chances of becoming an entrepreneur are just way higher because you see them take the risk, you see the day to days. So were your parents and entrepreneurs, or like, where do you think your entrepreneurial like, oh, I'm gonna be a go getter and like just kind of fly without any wings?
It comes where it comes from. I think my parents are really hard workers.
Yeah.
My dad's first generation Irish, my mom's second generation Polish. And so
Wow.
everything my parents have is what they built. And so regardless of if it's entrepreneur, it's a startup or it's not, my brother and I were taught we build what we want in life. And
Mm,
so I think but they're not. My dad was a college basketball coach, and so he builds programs at
yeah.
established universities, but
Yep.
like they're established. So he's a builder, as it
Mhm.
relates to the sports arena, the sports space. And my mom would always like have new business ideas and would do things, but never had to provide for herself in order to see them through. So I think she's entrepreneurial, but it's like somebody asked me, they're like, how do I make my job full time and as an entrepreneur? And I'm like, make your rent dependent on it. Oh yeah. I said, make your rent dependent on it.
I like
When you have to figure out if you're going to pay rent or not, you'll figure some shit out real quick.
I love that. That's really good. And we're going to end up with one more question as we are closing this book on this podcast. This has been super interesting. Like I said, you're like so mindful. It's blowing. It's like mind blowing. I want to ask, like, if you could think back to your 20s. I mean, is there like one trait that like really stands out to you where it's like, oh, I wish I would have invested in this a little bit more?
Hmm. I think for me, listening, I'm going to say listening,
Mm,
patience and experience. I think I was just always rushing to get to the next place, thinking that would be finally things would click
yeah.
without enjoying the experience and the journey. And I think at the end of the day, it's really about the relationships you're building, the lessons you're learning, and
Mm.
not about the end goal as much as I love an end goal. I think that's enjoying that process, right? Like I'm sure you have goals for your podcast and goals for yourself, but it's like this moment connecting that like that's the gold. And I wish I'd learned that sooner instead of running so fast and so far.
Oh man. Well, this episode went by very, very fast. We are coming down on time here. I mean, where can people find you? Where can people connect with you? Please plug it all. You were awesome to have on the podcast. I love this conversation. So I'd love for other people to connect with you as well.
Likewise, thank you. Yeah, you can follow us at Anact Global on Instagram. Our website's anact.com. You can send an email to our website if you have any questions, and then you can buy our product on Amazon and our website and several different wholesalers as well.
Perfect. Well, everyone, please go check out that website. The links will be below. Thank you so much again for coming on. This was an awesome episode. Learned a ton. Very, very mindful. So I appreciate that part of it. So yes, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ryan.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode with Brianna Kilcullen of Anact. This was a great conversation about sustainability, mindfulness, building a story. At the end, when she talked about sitting down and really taking in her growth, taking in her experiences and where she want to go for the future. That part really resonated with me. So if you love this episode, make sure to like it, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for all of our upcoming episodes as well. We have a ton of great guests coming on, and we don't want you to miss out on any of these interviews. If you really love what we're doing, make sure to give it a 5-star rating wherever you get to your podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, you'll also love these episodes with our former guests. Check them out when you can, and we will see you on the next episode.